Welcome to the show, everyone. Before we jump into anything else today, if you enjoy the deep dives we do here, please make sure to like and subscribe.
Yes, please do.
It really is the best way to support us, and it helps us keep doing what we do, which is, well, bringing you the absolute most fascinating, complex, and thought-provoking material we can find.
And today's material is certainly all of those things.
Oh, absolutely. We are tackling something incredibly provocative today. We're doing a deep dive into a brand new ebook that is basically setting certain corners of the internet on fire right now.
It's an absolute lightning rod.
It really is. The title is pretty intense. It's called Women Run Therapy, Sicker Than Ever, Jumped Up by Ideological Possession, and Literally Killing Western Civilization from the Inside.
It's a mouthful.
Yeah, it is. The copyright is 2025, and the author is listed as Connie Riker. And right off the bat, I want to tell you, if you want to read along or check this out for yourself after we unpack it, and honestly, you really might want to, you can find the book right now on Amazon Kindle and Google Play Books. It is a highly polarizing, gripping read that is guaranteed to challenge everything you think you know about modern psychology, the mental health industry, and the cultural discourse surrounding masculinity.
Definitely. I mean, it is an undeniably dense, aggressive, and just meticulously structured text. And our mission for this deep dive is to carefully and systematically unpack what is actually going on inside these pages.
Right, because there's a lot going on.
Exactly. When you look at the front matter, the text is explicitly categorized as a work of edutainment. But as you read through it, it becomes glaringly obvious that this book appears custom-built, like engineered from the ground up, for a very specific demographic.
A manosphere.
Precisely.
Yeah.
Specifically men's rights activists, or MRAs, and that broader manosphere audience. And for anyone unfamiliar, the manosphere generally refers to a collection of online subcultures focused on men's issues, often characterized by profound skepticism of modern feminism.
And this book speaks directly to that skepticism.
It does. The core, unrelenting argument this text presents is that Western institutions, most specifically the mental health, therapeutic, and psychiatric industries, have been entirely captured by feminist and Marxist ideologies. The author is presenting a worldview where the spaces traditionally designed for healing basically been weaponized into arenas of ideological control.
Which brings us to a really important point. Because this text is so incredibly polarizing and touches on some highly charged political ideas, both left-wing and right-wing, I want to be crystal clear with you, our listener. Our goal today is not to take a side.
Not at all.
We are not here to tell you if the politics within this book are right or wrong, or to endorse or validate these viewpoints. Our mission is simply to act as your objective tour guides through a wildly controversial worldview. We just want to unpack exactly how this author constructs her argument so you can understand the discourse for yourself.
Because understanding the argument is key to understanding the cultural moment.
Exactly. Whether you are insanely curious about how online subcultures view therapy, or you're trying to catch up on the latest cultural discourse, or you're just interested in the history of our institutions before they were allegedly captured by these ideologies, this book provides a raw, unfiltered blueprint of that specific worldview.
You really do need to know what arguments are animating this cultural moment, and this book just lays them completely bare.
So let's start with the framing, because the framing of this book is, well, it's wild. It's arguably its most fascinating psychological strategy.
It is. The author, Connie Riker, does not write this from the perspective of, say, an angry man who feels left behind by society.
Right, which is what you might expect given the target audience.
Exactly. Instead, the narrative voice is that of a radical, misandrist female therapist. This persona is proudly, openly declaring victory over men.
It's so intense.
It's a literary device. It's essentially a satirical Trojan horse. By adopting the persona of a feminist who gleefully admits to weaponizing therapy against men, the actual author, who, by the way, points the reader to a Substack at conradriker.substack.com, is speaking directly to the anxieties of red-pilled men.
I was reading the preface, and the tone is just set immediately. The author writes, from this persona's perspective, she says, quote, "You don't need therapy. What you need is rage. You need truth. You need to stop pretending that men are victims and start admitting what we all know in our bones they're the problem."
It's incredibly hostile.
Highly hostile. And then she literally commands male readers to stop reading. She writes, "Men don't belong in this book. In fact, if you're a man reading this, close it now. Put it down. Go lift weights. Fix a car. Do something useful."
Which is brilliant reverse psychology.
Right. You have to put yourself in the shoes of the target reader here. You pick up a book about how therapy is broken, and the very first thing the author does is tell you, a man, to get out.
Why would a book targeted at men tell men to put the book down. It creates this sense of trespassing into enemy territory. For the target audience men who already feel alienated by modern therapeutic language, having the perceived enemy confess to the exact institutional capture they fear is deeply, profoundly validating.
It validates everything they've been feeling.
Exactly. The persona claims she is sick of watching male therapists and researchers profit, and she states that the mental health industrial complex is built on the premise that men are broken. The text explicitly says, psychiatry was never meant to serve us, so we're burning it down and building something new.
Wow.
So by framing the book as a leaked confession of a hostile takeover, the narrative confirms every lingering suspicion the target reader already holds about the medical establishment.
It is essentially like reading the villain's diary, where the villain is looking right at the camera and saying, yes, we did everything you accused us of, and we are incredibly proud of it.
That's a great way to put it.
The text actually refers to itself as a war cry, and the sound of a million women saying they've successfully turned therapy into a tool of oppression. The persona boasts about medicalizing female anger and monetizing exhaustion. It just invites the reader into a secret text. It makes you feel like you've stumbled onto the playbook of the opposition.
And building on that sense of uncovering a playbook, the book immediately moves into establishing the foundation of this alleged takeover. It introduces a concept it calls the empathy hierarchy.
The empathy hierarchy, let's break that down.
So this is predicated on the statistical erasure of male emotions. The text argues that the therapy room has fundamentally mutated. It's no longer a neutral space for healing, but has instead become what the author terms an emotional inquisition and a feminist grievance machine.
And the data the author brings in to support this worldview is meant to be staggering. Like, we move into chapters 1 and 2 here. The book claims that 80% of therapists are now female.
Though it does adjust that number slightly to 76% a few chapters later.
Right. But either way, a massive majority. And it asserts that 89% of these therapists identify as progressive or feminist. So the author is painting a picture of a total demographic monopoly.
And the text references a 2021 Harvard study to back up the clinical impact of this monopoly. According to the book, this study shows that therapists spend 37% more time validating women's emotions than men's.
37% more time.
Even when the clinical symptoms presented by the patients are entirely identical.
That data point about the 37% discrepancy is so crucial to understanding this empathy hierarchy concept. In this framework, as defined by the text, female suffering is treated as sacred data. It's unquestionable, it's inherently valid, and culturally protected.
While male suffering is treated as suspect or inherently pathological.
Exactly. The book illustrates this with an anecdote about a quiet veteran named Mark T. He goes to therapy, tries to speak about his pain, and his emotional reality is immediately audited for authenticity. Yes, audited. He has to prove he isn't being toxic. Meanwhile, the text cynically remarks that female pain just prints money in this new emotional economy.
The idea that your pain is being audited is such a visceral concept. And the book takes it a step further to show how this hierarchy is supposedly enforced in practice. There is this exercise mentioned in the text called the privilege pie.
Oh yes, the privilege pie. This part was wild.
According to the book, this is an actual worksheet derived from the Feminist Therapy Institute. In this exercise, men sitting in a therapy session are forced to slice their suffering like a literal pie chart into portions of earned guilt and oppressor guilt.
Let's just visualize the scenario the author is painting here for you, the listener. A man seeks out professional help because he's in severe distress. He's sitting on the couch, vulnerable, paying out of pocket for a medical service, and instead of receiving traditional cognitive behavioral strategies to cope with his distress, he's handed a worksheet and asked to quantify his systemic privilege. The text mentions a specific example of a man who, after completing this exercise, admitted that 87% of his pain was simply guilt for existing in a system that favored him.
And the author's persona, the radical therapist, calls this realization accountability. She celebrates it.
But to the intended MRA reader, this is presented as the ultimate horrifying form of psychological gaslighting. Imagine going in for help, and you are essentially told to mathematically calculate your own oppressor status.
The text claims that the 90% of men who stay in therapy under these conditions end up feeling spiritually castrated.
Spiritually castrated.
That's the exact phrase used. And the book frames this outcome not as a tragic accident of a flawed system, but as the explicit goal. It claims that men are not inherently broken, but the system is rigged to perceive them as defective by design.
which naturally pushes the narrative into the realm of medicalization. Because you have to wonder, how does this ideological hierarchy translate into actual billable medical diagnoses and treatments?
That's where we get to chapters 3 and 4. The text explores this by outlining what it calls the chemical caste system and the systemic pathologizing of masculinity.
So the argument shifts from how therapists talk to men to how the medical industry physically diagnoses and medicates them.
Precisely. The book goes incredibly hard on this concept. It argues that perfectly normal, historically celebrated male behaviors, things like stoicism, independence, a desire to provide for your family, or a protective instinct, are now being treated as literal diseases in the diagnostic and statistical manual.
Yeah, the text uses the term toxic protector syndrome as a prime example of this. It claims male instincts are being medicalized and treated as a pathology to be cured rather than a trait to be channeled.
To paint this picture of systemic medical bias, the text leans on another set of statistics. It claims that men are 3.2 times more likely than women to be slapped with a conduct or substance disorder label.
3.2 times. So the implication there is that female distress is categorized as depression or anxiety.
Things that elicit sympathy.
Right. While male distress is categorized as a behavioral disorder.
Something that elicits discipline or control.
Exactly. Furthermore, the book brings up that 2021 Harvard study again, claiming that male clients are 3 times more likely to be medicated with SSRIs, which are antidepressants, than they are to be offered cognitive behavioral strategies.
And the analysis the book provides for why SSRIs are pushed so heavily onto men is truly chilling. The text claims these antidepressants are prescribed like candy, not because they are the most effective way to heal male trauma, but because they have a specific side effect profile.
They make men quiet, compliant, and easier to manage.
The author is essentially arguing that the industry is using pharmaceuticals to chemically castrate a generation of men, dampening their natural drives to maintain this new female-dominated societal order.
The mechanics of how a man actually ends up medicated and silenced are laid out in what the text calls the therapy trap spiral. It describes a very specific, multi-step pipeline.
Yes, 4 steps.
First, the man reaches a breaking point and seeks help, buying into the societal messaging that therapy is the answer. Second, once in the room, he is shamed or told to check his privilege. And the text claims that men are 4 times more likely to be told to check their privilege in a therapeutic setting than women.
Which, if you think about it, completely derails the therapeutic process. You are there to talk about your divorce or your deep depression, and suddenly you are actively defending your demographic status.
That leads right to the third step. As a result of this shaming and ideological auditing, a man naturally retreats into silence. He shuts down.
He stops talking.
Because it's unsafe. Finally, the fourth step. He is penalized and clinically diagnosed for being shut down or emotionally unavailable. The system creates the very behavior it then turns around and medicates.
It's a self-fulfilling prophecy, according to the text.
I really want to relate this to you, the listener, to capture the sheer absurdity the author claims has been normalized here. The text explicitly asks the reader to imagine a scenario to highlight this double standard.
The broken leg analogy.
Yes. Imagine going to an emergency room for a broken leg. You walk in, your bone is physically snapped, you are in absolute agony. And the doctor looks at you and says, before we set this bone, first, you need to acknowledge your able-bodied privilege.
It's absurd.
According to the book, that is exactly what is happening to men in mental health spaces. Their psychological pain isn't viewed as a structural issue or a valid injury requiring care. It's viewed as their own fault, a product of their arrogance or privilege. Meanwhile, women's pain is treated as a tragic result of systemic oppression requiring infinite grace.
The phrasing chemical caste system really does a lot of heavy lifting here. It implies a rigid, unbreakable social order that is enforced not just by cultural norms, but by actual pharmaceuticals.
The book points out that the mental health industry is a $300 billion beast, and it argues that this beast doesn't actually want men healed.
Because a healed man leaves the system.
Right. The industry wants them hooked, dependent, and compliant. It argues that a man who believes he cannot function without therapy is a man who will keep paying his copay every single week.
The narrative posits that masculinity itself has been turned into a pre-existing condition, a chronic illness that requires lifelong management by female practitioners.
If you're reading this and buying into the premise, the logical next question you'd ask is, how on earth did this get so widespread? I mean, if this was just a few bad therapists in a few progressive cities, you could just find a different doctor.
But the book argues this is everywhere.
Exactly. And that brings us to the bureaucratic aspect of the text, where it traces this ideology directly into official institutional policy. We're looking at chapters 8, 11, and 19 here. And I have to express my absolute astonishment at the sheer volume of institutional rules, laws, state codes, and federal acts the author cites to build this case.
The author is meticulously constructing an argument that this is not just some grassroots cultural shift. It is a systemic, top-down capture of the medical and legal codes by Marxist and feminist frameworks. The book argues that therapy has been formalized into a system of ideological re-education enforced by the state.
Let's run through the specific policies the text brings up because it literally reads like a legal indictment.
Let's do it.
First, the author points to California, specifically state laws AB 1478 and AB 1492. The book claims these laws mandate all state-funded therapy programs to use gender-responsive frameworks. Now, on the surface, gender-responsive sounds like a neutral, positive tailoring of care.
Sure, it sounds beneficial.
But the text claims that the fine print, the actual implementation of these frameworks, really means centering women's narratives at all times and treating any male complaints as toxic deflection.
And the capture doesn't stop at the state level. The text points directly to the federal government. It cites the 2019 Federal Mental Health Modernization Act.
Okay, what does that act do, according to the book?
The book claims this act financially rewards clinics, meaning it attaches literal dollar amounts and funding to clinics that utilize frameworks prioritizing female trauma. The implication is that if your pain aligns with progressive gender theory, the clinic gets funding to help you. If you are a man reporting abuse, you are an administrative burden and are told to reflect on your privilege.
Wow. It also brings up a much more recent law, the 2021 Bipartisan Safer Communities Act. The book notes this act funneled a massive $1.2 billion into youth mental health initiatives across the country.
But it claims that 87% of that money was earmarked strictly for girls' programs.
87%. And it alleges that this funding is tied to equity metrics that essentially punish schools or clinics that attempt to allocate equal resources to help boys who are struggling.
It's a complete financial blockade, as the author frames it, and the bureaucratic net extends even further into the very language of medicine, the diagnostic coding.
Yes, the ICD codes.
The text cites ICD-11 code Z63.0.
Yeah.
For context for the listener, the ICD, or International Classification of Diseases, is the foundational manual doctors and health organizations use worldwide to code diseases for diagnosis and insurance billing. It is the absolute bedrock of medical administration.
And the book claims that under this new code, emotional harm has become a literal, billable medical diagnosis.
And the way the book says this code is used is wild. It argues that emotional harm is invoked when men speak truths or express frustrations that make female clients or therapists feel unsafe.
It essentially turns a disagreement, or a man just expressing a contrary viewpoint, into a billable emotional assault. You aren't just having an argument, you are committing a medical injury.
Finally, the text turns to the guidelines that govern the professionals themselves, specifically referencing the American Psychological Association, or APA. The APA is the leading scientific and professional organization representing psychology in the United States.
And the book points to two specific documents from them.
Right. The APA's 2023 Inclusive Language Guide and a 2022 Ethics Update. According to the text, this ethics update allows social justice advocacy to be considered a valid primary therapeutic goal.
The text translates that to mean that therapists can essentially prioritize their own political ideology over the patient's individual well-being. If the therapist decides that dismantling patriarchy is the therapeutic goal, then the male patient's personal struggles are entirely secondary to that political mission.
The book says this replaces actual evidence-based psychology with what it calls a Marxist confessional.
When you pull back and look at the bigger picture the book is drawing with all these citations, it is illustrating a locked-down, inescapable system. By citing state laws, federal funding acts, international diagnostic codes, and the premier professional association's guidelines, the narrative posits that the bureaucratic capture is absolute.
The institutions haven't just shifted culturally. Their actual written rules, the very bylaws of the industry, have been fundamentally rewritten to enforce what the book aggressively labels a matriarchy.
So we have the theory, the hierarchy, and the laws. But what does this institutional rule rewriting actually look like in practice, outside the therapist's office? How does it affect everyday life, family dynamics, and society at large?
The book tackles this in chapters 7 and 16 by focusing on what it calls the war on fatherhood and the broader cancellation of men. It argues that this weaponized therapy is actively used to isolate fathers and erase male influence from the family unit entirely.
The book leans heavily into the idea that children are treated as acceptable collateral damage in this ongoing gender war. To support this really devastating claim, it cites a 2024 University of Toronto meta-analysis.
And according to the text, this extensive study demonstrated that active father involvement in a child's life reduces that child's anxiety by a massive 42%.
42%.
Yeah.
That is an overwhelmingly positive metric for male presence. Yet the book claims, despite this glaring evidence, only 3% of modern therapy guidelines even mention father engagement as a beneficial or necessary component of child psychology.
The author argues that the therapeutic system intentionally buries this data because admitting that fathers are statistically vital would threaten the entire edifice of female supremacy in mental health.
The anecdotes the author uses to flesh this out are really striking. The text highlights a story out of Portland, Oregon about a community group called Dads Who Feel.
It was supposed to be a simple grassroots support group.
Yeah, just for men to get together and talk about the stress of divorce, the struggle with single parenting, and male loneliness, just guys supporting guys. But the book claims the local community center forcibly shut the group down.
And the reason given.
The group was accused of promoting toxic resilience and violating the center's emotional equity policies. They literally treated the concept of male strength and resilience like it was dangerous contraband.
This systemic hostility toward male bonding and vulnerability brings us to a terrifying concept the text calls the loyalty split. The book references a Yale Law Review study which it claims found that in 41% of high-conflict divorce cases, therapists admitted to sharing their male clients' private session details with their female partners or with the court.
41%. That is a staggering concept for anyone who has ever sought confidential help. You go to a therapist assuming doctor-patient privilege is absolute.
The text argues this massive breach of medical confidentiality is routinely justified under the vague excuse of ensuring the emotional safety of the woman.
The author's view is that in this new matriarchal system, male vulnerability is quite literally a trap. Men are culturally encouraged to open up, to cry, to show their weaknesses, but the second they do, those very vulnerabilities and admissions are weaponized against them in family courts to strip them of custody, alimony, and their reputation.
The book spells it out bluntly. It says, tears from a woman, healing. Tears from a man, suspicious, possibly manipulative.
It's so cynical.
The text provides another illustrative anecdote to emphasize how male voices are surveilled and canceled even outside the high-stakes environment of family court, specifically within group therapy settings. It details an incident at a UCLA group therapy session, referring to it somewhat notoriously as the Pythagorean incident.
Pythagorean incident, right?
According to the book, a man in the group was trying to lighten the mood or perhaps push back slightly on the prevailing narrative and made a joke, saying simply, "Men invented math."
And the reaction to that seemingly mundane, if slightly provocative comment was instantaneous and severe, according to the book. It triggered a full-scale institutional ideological intervention.
He wasn't just corrected or asked to explain himself. He was put on a mandatory re-education plan.
He was forced to attend specialized workshops focusing on colonial knowledge systems, where he had to write extensive essays apologizing and detailing how the Greek mathematician Pythagoras oppressed indigenous counting methods.
The text mockingly calls this a Maoist-style re-education camp with yoga mats and essential oils.
This anecdote, regardless of its literal veracity, perfectly encapsulates the book's core argument about the cancellation of men. It asserts a paradigm where men are fundamentally not allowed to hold pride in historical achievements, nor are they allowed to express harmless, deflective humor without being subjected to extreme, humiliating ideological purification.
The therapy room is presented not as a safe space, but as a panopticon where any deviation from progressive orthodoxy is met with immediate disciplinary action.
It is just wild to imagine that level of surveillance. But the text insists that this totalitarianism doesn't stop at the therapist's door or even the family court. It is leaking out into everything.
The author claims that this therapeutic mindset has completely infected the corporate workplace and broader society, leading to what she calls corporate totalitarianism and the rise of the female empire. We see this in chapters 13 and 20.
The core argument advanced here is that the boundaries of therapy have expanded aggressively, turning corporate environments, offices, boardrooms, retail chains into spaces of mandatory emotional surveillance.
The text shares an anecdote about a man who was fired from a management position at Starbucks. And crucially, the book notes he wasn't fired for misconduct, sexual harassment, or poor financial performance.
No, he was fired for what the book terms emotional constipation. Essentially, for not crying enough or failing to show sufficient performative emotion during mandatory corporate group bonding sessions.
The book also mentions a 2023 leadership event, a corporate retreat for executives, where managers were literally rated on a rubric by how often they cried in front of their teams.
It is framing the modern workplace as a dystopian environment where competence is secondary. You have to constantly perform emotional vulnerability and trauma just to keep your job. And there is a legal precedent the book claims is emerging from this culture, which it calls therapeutic loyalty.
The concept of therapeutic loyalty represents a terrifying erosion of privacy, according to the text. The book uses the example of a highly successful math teacher in Illinois. This teacher was allegedly fired for refusing to hand over his private, personal therapy notes to his school district's human resources department.
The district allegedly claimed that by keeping his therapy private, he withheld emotional transparency, which they argued inherently endangered the students.
The book highlights this case to argue that the private sanctuary of therapy has been inverted into a corporate loyalty oath, where noncompliance and desire for privacy are automatic grounds for termination.
It really paints a dystopian picture of the modern workforce. I was reading the section about how this targets specific types of men, and the book introduces this concept called the therapeutic dependence index. How exactly is the book defining this index, and how does it supposedly trap people?
According to the author, the therapeutic dependence index is a quiet, unpublished, internal metric used by modern psychiatric clinics. It measures how likely a patient is to stay in therapy indefinitely, essentially, their lifetime value as a customer.
And who scores highest on this index?
The text claims, rather shockingly, that independent, successful, highly functional men actually score the highest. They are labeled internally as high-value emotional projects.
The argument the book makes is that the system doesn't want to solve these men's problems. Instead, it wants to destroy the story the man tells about himself through a process of narrative dismantling.
Right. If a man is strong and stoic, the therapist relabels it as dangerous repression. If he is calm under pressure, it is diagnosed as emotional detachment or sociopathy.
The goal, the book states, is to break down his self-reliance and trap these capable men in an indefinite state of emotional colonization, relying on the clinic to interpret reality for them.
And the book argues that this isn't just theory. It is happening on a macro, societal, global level. It refers to this shift as the rebirth of the female empire, and it gives some truly extreme, almost unbelievable examples to prove its point.
Let's look at the international example first. The book claims that in 2023, Sweden's Västra Götaland region rolled out a comprehensive mental health initiative that is actively legally phasing out male clinicians.
According to the text, male patients can still show up to the hospital, but they will only be treated by female doctors and nurses, ensuring women are the sole gatekeepers of mental health.
And the text provides equally radical domestic examples to illustrate the reach of this empire. It mentions the Boulder Sisterhood Wellness Collective in Colorado. According to the book, this clinic explicitly bans men from practicing as full therapists.
Instead, men can only be hired as apprentices who must work under the strict supervision of female mentors, regardless of the men's actual academic credentials or years of experience.
The book quotes the clinic's manifesto as saying, emotional authority isn't earned through credentials, it's inherited through the womb.
And perhaps the most extreme dystopian example the book offers is out of Oakland, California. The text describes a newly funded feminist housing project that provides free therapy, job placement, and shelter to homeless women, no questions asked.
But for homeless men to get help, the book claims these desperate, unhoused men are forced to go through a mandatory 12-week emotional humility curriculum.
And this curriculum is taught exclusively by female survivors of male violence.
The text claims these homeless men, even if they have absolutely no criminal record and have never harmed anyone, are made to write agonizing apology letters to hypothetical women they might have hurt in a past life or might have inadvertently oppressed through their mere existence as men, just to secure a bed for the night.
These examples, whether a reader takes them as literal, documented truth or views them as highly stylized hyperbole meant to make a point, are used masterfully by the author to build a cohesive, terrifying vision for the target audience.
It paints a vivid picture of a world where male autonomy, privacy, and dignity are systematically dismantled at every single level of society. The doctor's office, the family court, the corporate boardroom, and even down to the level of homeless shelters.
Which brings us to the epilogue, the final chapter of the book, which serves as a massive call to arms. Here, the text shifts its tone noticeably.
Yeah, the satirical persona of the gleeful, radical, misandrous therapist drops just a little bit, and the text seems to speak directly, almost earnestly, to the men who have endured reading through to the end.
The author acknowledges in this epilogue that reading the preceding chapters was likely a brutal, infuriating experience for a male reader. The text drops the irony and calls the book a literal war cry and a gut punch to a system that the author claims has been lying to the public for decades.
It explicitly states that the mainstream concept of toxic masculinity is not a valid medical, scientific, or psychological term at all. Rather, it is a political hit squad, disguised as medicine, designed to pathologize dissent.
The language used in this epilogue is incredibly intense and memorable. The author accuses the modern therapy industry of engaging in what she calls spiritual necrophilia.
Which is just a wild, deeply unsettling phrase.
Very unsettling. The text defines this as essentially violating the corpse of true traditional empathy, hollowing it out, and branding it as modern empowerment.
As we wrap up our analysis of this text, we have to look objectively at why this book is so incredibly effective at reaching its target audience.
It is effective because it provides a comprehensive, unifying, grand unified theory for a very specific demographics pain. For men who feel alienated, silenced, passed over for promotions, or judged by modern institutions, their pain often feels disconnected and confusing.
This book takes all those disparate feelings of unease, all those microaggressions they feel they face, and weaves them into a validating, monolithic narrative.
By framing therapy not as a place of healing, but as a hostile, surveilled space of ideological capture, the text looks these men in the eye and tells them, you aren't crazy, you aren't broken, you aren't toxic. The system really is out to get you and has the paperwork to prove it.
It perfectly validates their worldview by having the so-called enemy gloat about their victory. It takes every fear the manosphere has and says, yes, it's all true and it's worse than you thought. It is a masterful, if incredibly controversial, piece of political edutainment.
And that leaves us with a profound, final provocative thought for you, the listener, to mull over long after this deep dive ends. If the very institutions that a society relies upon for healing, for conflict resolution, and for establishing an objective baseline of truth are perceived by a massive demographic, literally millions of men, as hostile, weaponized spaces of ideological capture.
Wait, I was just thinking,
Go ahead.
where did those people turn for help when they are genuinely in crisis?
Exactly. If you truly believe the doctor is actively trying to poison you with ideology instead of medicine, you stop going to the doctor. You suffer in silence. Or you turn to alternative, potentially much darker, unvetted spaces for answers.
And what happens to the fabric of a civilization when its fundamental foundation of shared reality, of mutual care, and of trusted medical institutions completely fractures along gender lines?
When a massive, vital portion of the population completely opts out of the systems meant to hold society together, the consequences for the future of that civilization are entirely uncharted.
That is an incredibly chilling thought to leave on, and it really highlights why understanding the arguments in this book is so important, regardless of where you stand politically. If you want to dive deeper into this author's perspective and explore these ideas further, you should definitely follow @ConradRiker at Substack. They expand on a lot of these concepts there.
And as a final reminder, the ebook we reviewed and unpacked today is Women Run Therapy Sicker Than Ever, Jumped Up by Ideological Possession, and Literally Killing Western Civilization from the Inside by Connie Riker.
You can buy it right now by checking Amazon Kindle and Google Play Books. If you want to truly understand this specific cultural moment, the profound anxieties driving it, and the complex arguments animating the manosphere, it is an absolute must-read. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Please take a second to make sure to like and subscribe to support the show so we can keep bringing you these exhaustive deep dives into the most fascinating materials out there. See you next time.